Most revolutions don't start with applause. They begin with someone being quietly dismissed, not shouted down, not attacked, just smiled at and ignored. Ed Catmull grew up in a world where art and science were treated like opposites. You were expected to choose one. Dreamers chose art, serious people chose engineering. Ed wanted both. As a child, he didn't imagine becoming famous. He imagined making images move in ways that felt alive, not cartoons as entertainment, but images as emotion, pictures that could think, breathe, hesitate. Even then, people told him the same thing. That's not practical. That's not a real career. That's not how movies are made. So he did the responsible thing. He studied physics, then computer science. Not because he gave up on imagination, but because he understood something early. If you want to change a system, you have to understand it better than the people guarding it. In the 1960s and 70s, computers were machines for calculation. Cold, rigid, ugly by artistic standards. Using them to create beauty sounded absurd. When Ed talked about computer animation, people didn't argue with him. They just assumed he was naive. Hollywood didn't need engineers. Universities didn't take art seriously. Studios didn't trust technology. So Ed lived in the gap between worlds. Too artistic for scientists, too technical for artists. That isolation shaped him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't charismatic. He didn't sell visions with speeches. He worked quietly, patiently, methodically. While others chased recognition, Ed chased capability. He helped create some of the first computer-generated images ever made, not because anyone asked for them, but because he believed images could one day carry emotion the way actors do. Most people laughed at that idea. Pixels didn't cry. Algorithms didn't love. Machines didn't tell stories. That belief that technology was soulless would cost Ed years of rejection. Funding collapsed. Projects were canceled. Teams were dissolved. At one point, the very institutions that hired him decided his work had no future. He wasn't fired dramatically. He was quietly let go. No scandal, no headlines, just a door closing. And that moment matters, because it's easy to believe in yourself when the world is curious. It's harder when the world is bored. Ed Catmull stood in that silence with no proof that he was right. Only conviction, not confidence. Conviction. Confidence wants validation. Conviction survives without it. He didn't double down emotionally. He doubled down structurally. He refined algorithms, built better models, improved rendering, solved problems no one thought were worth solving yet. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was preparing for a future he believed would eventually arrive. And that future would come. Not because the world changed its mind, but because the world would eventually need what it once mocked. There is a special kind of failure reserved for people who arrive too early. Not wrong, not incompetent, just ahead of the moment. Ed Catmull lived there for years. Every breakthrough he made felt invisible. Every improvement landed in a vacuum. He wasn't chasing trends, he was waiting for reality to catch up. At the University of Utah, he worked alongside minds who would later define computer graphics. They weren't celebrities. They were misfits with terminals and patience. They believed images could be built, not drawn, calculated, not painted, rendered from logic instead of instinct. The rest of the world didn't care. Hollywood still trusted cameras. Studios trusted stars. Technology was a tool, not a storyteller. Ed tried to bridge that gap. He joined Lucasfilm, believing that science fiction might be the one place imagination and computation could coexist. For a while, it worked. The computer division at Lucasfilm became a sanctuary for dreamers who spoke in code. They weren't making movies, they were inventing the language future movies would use. But invention doesn't protect you from economics. When financial pressure hit, when priorities shifted, the experimental department became expendable. Ed didn't lose an argument, he lost relevance, temporarily. The division was sold. Many would have taken that as a verdict. Ed didn't. The buyer was an unlikely one, Steve Jobs. Fresh off his own humiliation, fired from Apple, branded difficult, questioned publicly. Two men both considered problems, now bound by a shared belief. The future doesn't ask permission. Jobs renamed the division Pixar. At first, Pixar wasn't a movie studio. It was a hardware company, selling machines no one wanted, burning money quietly. The dream of computer-animated films still sounded insane. Executives smiled politely. Investors lost patience. Critics dismissed the idea as novelty. And internally, the tension grew. Jobs pushed for perfection. Ed pushed for sustainability. This is where Ed's real genius emerged, not in code, but in culture. He realized something dangerous early. If fear enters a creative system, truth disappears. Teams stop sharing bad news, mistakes hide, innovation dies quietly. Ed refused to build that kind of place. While Pixar struggled financially, he built something rarer than technology: trust. Meetings where anyone could speak, postmortems without blame, ideas judged on merit, not hierarchy. That approach looked soft. It wasn't. It was ruthless in a different way, because it forced honesty. While other companies protected egos, Pixar protected process. Years passed, no blockbuster, no validation, just work. Then came a question that changed everything. What if a computer could tell a story without pretending to be human? What if emotion didn't come from realism, but from truth? That question would become Toy Story, and it nearly killed Pixar. When the first dream almost broke. Everyone, Toy Story did not begin as magic. It began as tension, the kind that creeps into a room slowly until people stop smiling, stop risking honesty, stop telling each other the truth. The early versions of the film were wrong. Not broken in a technical sense. The rendering worked, the characters moved, the software did what it was designed to do, but the soul wasn't there. The characters felt sharp, clever but cold, impressive but empty. And the worst part was this: everyone could feel it, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The pressure was enormous. Pixar had burned through money for years. This film wasn't just a project, it was a verdict. If Toy Story failed, there would be no second attempt, no graceful pivot, no quiet reset. Pixar would simply end. That kind of pressure makes people cautious. It makes them defensive. It makes them protect their ideas instead of testing them. Ed Catmull saw it happening. He didn't panic. He didn't demand answers. He didn't tighten control. He did something counterintuitive. He slowed everything down. He gathered the team and made one thing clear: this isn't working, and that's not a crime. In most companies, admitting failure at that stage would have meant blame. Someone would lose authority. Someone would be sidelined. At Pixar, it meant permission. Permission to tear the film apart. Permission to criticize leadership. Permission to say, this version is wrong. That moment saved Pixar. The team rewrote characters, softened edges, found vulnerability. Woody stopped being cruel. Buzz stopped being a joke. They became human without being human. That shift didn't come from better software. It came from emotional honesty. And that honesty existed only because Ed protected it. He understood something most leaders miss. Creative success is not about avoiding mistakes. It's about shortening the distance between error and admission. Toy Story succeeded not because Pixar was brilliant, but because Pixar was allowed to be wrong early and openly. When the film was released, the world saw a miracle. What they didn't see were the years of quiet doubt, the nights when failure felt inevitable, the meetings where careers could have ended if honesty hadn't been protected. Pixar became a success overnight. Ed Catmull did not. He stayed where he always was, behind the scenes, asking questions no one else was asking. Now the world wanted more. Sequels, hits, scale, and this is where most revolutions collapse, because repeating success is harder than achieving it once. Failure makes people humble. Success makes them careless. Ed Catmull knew this, even as Toy Story rewrote the rules of cinema. The applause was real. The money arrived. The industry changed its posture overnight. Suddenly, the same executives who once smiled politely were calling non-stop. Studios wanted the Pixar formula. Companies wanted the Pixar culture. And that was the danger. Because culture isn't a formula. It's a fragile agreement between people to tell the truth even when it hurts. As Pixar grew, Ed noticed subtle shifts. Meetings ran longer. People deferred to past wins. Young voices hesitated in rooms full of legends. No one announced these changes. They just appeared quietly. This is how creative organizations rot, not through bad intentions, but through comfort. Ed refused to let success rewrite the rules. He institutionalized dissent, not rebellion, not chaos, structured disagreement. He created spaces where unfinished work could be criticized without consequence, where ideas were judged apart from the people who proposed them, where seniority offered no protection from bad feedback. The brain trust wasn't a meeting, it was a philosophy. Authority did not equal correctness. Consensus did not equal truth. That offended some people. Talented people left. Others struggled to adapt. Ed accepted that, because protecting honesty mattered more than protecting feelings. As Pixar released film after film, Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Up, the myth grew that Pixar never failed. Ed hated that myth. He documented failures obsessively. He studied mistakes more than successes. He warned teams against trusting applause. Because applause fades, process endures. Then came the unexpected challenge. Disney, the company that once dominated animation, had lost its edge, and now it wanted Pixar. The acquisition was massive, public, unavoidable. Most feared Pixar would be absorbed, diluted, flattened. Ed saw something else, a chance to test whether culture could scale. He didn't storm in, he listened. He didn't impose Pixar's methods. He introduced principles, candor, psychological safety, respect for unfinished ideas. Some resisted, some resented him. Change always feels like judgment to those who benefit from the old system. Ed stayed patient. He wasn't trying to be loved. He was trying to make creativity survivable. Years later, when people ask how Pixar kept winning, they talk about technology, or leadership, or luck. They miss the point. Pixar worked because Ed Catmull believed something simple and rare. People want to do great work. They just need environments that don't punish honesty. That belief reshaped an industry, and it almost ended his career more than once. Because trusting people is always a risk, but distrusting them is a guarantee of decay. Toward the later years, Ed Catmull stopped chasing outcomes, not because he had grown tired, and not because there was nothing left to prove. He stopped because he finally understood what success was never meant to measure. Movies end, box office numbers fade, awards gather dust. What lasts is behavior. Ed watched generations of filmmakers pass through Pixar and Disney. Some stayed, some left. Many carried pieces of the culture into places he would never visit. That mattered more to him than any sequel. He had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that innovation does not come from brilliance alone. It comes from permission. Permission to fail without humiliation. Permission to speak without fear. Permission to be unfinished in public. These ideas sound simple. They are not. Most leaders say they want honesty. Few can tolerate it when it arrives. Ed trained himself to sit still when uncomfortable truths surfaced, to listen without defending, to separate his identity from his decisions. That discipline was harder than any technical problem he ever solved, because ego is quieter than fear, but far more dangerous. As Pixar matured, Ed stepped back deliberately. He didn't cling to control. He didn't protect his legacy by freezing it in time. He allowed the system to evolve. Some changes worked, some didn't. That was the point. A culture that cannot change is already dead. When Ed finally spoke publicly about his philosophy, people treated it like revelation. He was confused by that. None of it was new. He hadn't invented trust. He hadn't discovered creativity. He hadn't cracked some hidden code. He had simply paid attention to how people behave under pressure. He noticed that fear makes liars of honest people, that punishment teaches silence, that brilliance shrivels when survival becomes the goal. So he designed against fear. Not perfectly, not permanently, but intentionally. If there is a single lesson in Ed Catmull's life, it is not about animation, it is about timing. He was mocked because he was early, ignored because he was patient, respected only after the world caught up. And even then, he refused to believe the applause. Because applause changes nothing, systems do. Pixar did not change cinema because computers became powerful. It changed cinema because someone believed people could be trusted with the truth. That belief is fragile. It requires constant protection, and it is always under threat, from success most of all. Ed Catmull understood that, and when he finally stepped aside, he didn't leave behind a formula. He left behind a warning. If you want creativity, you must make room for discomfort. If you want innovation, you must tolerate inefficiency. If you want greatness, you must accept that control is the enemy. The world now sees Pixar as inevitable. It was anything but. It existed because one person refused to stop believing in technology before the world was ready to feel through pixels. That is how change really happens. Quietly, patiently, and long before anyone claps.